Good evening. It's good to see you all once again as we continue in our worship of our God this day. If you'll be opening your Bibles to the book of 1 Samuel, chapter 24, we'll be there in just a moment. 1 Samuel, chapter 24. Next Sunday is the last Sunday of the month, and so next Sunday evening we'll be having our song service, and so of the men here, if you would like to participate in that, please select one or two songs you would like to lead, or a scripture reading or prayer you would like to lead. And I'm going to ask that preferably those songs, scripture readings, and prayers be to me by Wednesday and no later than Thursday by 5 o'clock. Last time we kind of cut it close, and there's a little bit of work that goes into making sure everything's organized and everything. So you know your favorite songs, you know your favorite scriptures, just jot them down and give them to me by Thursday at 5 o'clock, none later than that. And it's first come, first serve, so I can't guarantee if you get to me Thursday that you'll get your songs because somebody might have gotten to me on Monday. So sooner you act, the better. So appreciate that. We'll get that together so we can have that, our song service, next Sunday evening. Sent out the questionnaire, study guide for Revelation chapter 2 this afternoon. It is uploaded on the website, and so be looking for that as well. Printed copies are in the library. Tonight, we'll be picking up where we left off last time. I had a whole other slide last Sunday evening, and I saw the time, and I was a good 10 after, so I figured that's probably a good stopping point. But we're going to be looking tonight at Saul and David meeting in the cave there. And we've titled this lesson from one of David's Psalms that he wrote, reflecting back on this period of life, where he penned the words in Psalm 57 that his soul was among the lions. This is probably one of the darker periods of David's life, as he goes from being the youngest of this family of Jesse to being elevated in the king's court, to becoming part of the king's bodyguard and one of his commanders in the army. And he goes from these heights of restoring faith in Israel's God and leading the people courageously, becoming the son-in-law of the king, to where Saul goes further and further mad with paranoia. To where, as we saw last time, not only is the high priest telling Saul's mad, Saul's own son is telling him is mad, and those who still have the courage to tell the truth are telling Saul, what are you doing? David has done no wrong against you, and yet you keep seeking his life. And of all the abominable things that King Saul did, last time we noted how Saul was so paranoid that David might possibly, maybe, take the throne from him, that he had the priests of God slaughtered because he thought they were conspiring against him. Only one made it alive and found his way to David's cave. But it's during this period of David's life that he comes to the cave here in 1 Samuel 21. Actually, we're going to go back a couple chapters before we get to chapter 24. It's here in the cave of Adullam that David flees from Saul's presence. He first goes to Gath in chapter 21. In verse 10, then David arose and fled that day from Saul and went to Achish, king of Gath. Now the servants of Achish recognize that this is David, Saul's servant. He can't stay there for long, and so David is in the countryside, fleeing from place to place to place as a fugitive from the king. And it's because, again, as we covered last time, Saul has no less than at least 3 or 4 times tried to take David's life by either feigning or not of his madness, the afflicting spirit, and David's playing the harp on one occasion, and Saul's hand is on his spear, and he takes the opportunity to try and pin David to the wall. Multiple times David is having to flee, and it gets to the point now where Saul is just openly seeking David's life. So what do you do? You run and hide. And that's where he comes to this cave here. If we look in chapter 22, verses 1 and 2, so David departed from there, and he escaped to the cave of Adullam, and his brother heard of it, and went down there to him. Everyone who was in debt, and everyone who was bitter of soul gathered to him, and he became a commander over them. Now there were about 400 men with him. Here's Saul, still living in his palace, surrounded by luxury. And here's the future king of Israel in waiting, camping out in a dark, damp cave. Saul has all the elite and all the who's who of Israel around him, and David has not intentionally gathered, but all the people who have found no place in Saul's kingdom, basically, are flocking to David. Those who are bitter in spirit, those in debt. His own family has gathered to him. And so they're just all there sitting in the cave, wondering what to do. In chapter 23, looking at the first 5 verses, it's interesting that interspersed in this section of 1 Samuel is why Saul is gone mad with trying to find David. He has neglected one of the chief duties of king, and it's to protect the people. He is so bent on finding David, he doesn't even realize that the Philistines have been probing the borders and making incursions and afflicting Israel and its allies. So David, with his ragtag band of ill-equipped, ill-trained, bitter in spirit people, in chapter 23, David acts, no surprise, like a king, even in his exile. Picking up in verse 1, it says, Then they told David, the people who have since come and fled the slaughter of the priest, then they told David, saying, Behold, the Philistines are fighting against Keilah, and are pillaging the threshing floors. And note here, again, the contrast we're going to see between David and Saul. So David asked of Yahweh, saying, Shall I go and strike these Philistines? And Yahweh said to David, Go and strike the Philistines and save Keilah. But David's men said to him, Behold, we are afraid here in Judah. How much more then if we go to Keilah against the battle lines of the Philistines? Then David asked of Yahweh once more. And Yahweh answered him and said, Arise, go to Keilah, and I will give the Philistines into your hand. Now, if we were doing a whole study of 1 Samuel, we would have noted by this point that Saul has long stopped asking God what he thinks he should do. Saul is not asking God if he should seek the life of David. Saul is not asking God what should be the national agenda. What should we be doing? Saul is doing what Saul wants to do. And this goes back to 1 Samuel 8 in our first study of Saul will be a king like the nations. He will be a king like men. He will be a king after man's own heart. And what does man do when he's left to his own devices? He does whatever seems right. Judges 25, the very last verse of the book of Judges. And yet David, even when he's fleeing, he's a fugitive, he is in exile, he is with this ragtag band of malcontents and rejects, David still sees it right and fitting. We need to consult the Lord about what we need to do. This new group of people that come in says the Philistines, the enemies of God, are now pillaging and plundering. And David says, well, what should we do, God? Should we fight your enemies, or should we stay here in the cave? And God gives him the answer twice. You need to go up and defend these people. And so we jump down in verse 8. Then Saul, here's the contrast. Then Saul summoned all the people for battle to go down to Keilah and besiege David and his men. Notice what brings Saul to this place. It's not that he has heard that the Philistines are attacking the land. It's, oh, David's there. That's why I'm going. Doesn't care about anything else. Verse 9. But David knew that Saul was plotting evil against him, so he said to Abiathar the priest, "Bring the ephod here." Then David said, "O Yahweh, the God of Israel, your slave has heard for certain that Saul is seeking to come to Keilah to make the city a ruin on my account. Will the men of Keilah surrender me into his hand? Will Saul come down just as your slave has heard? O Yahweh, the God of Israel, I pray, tell your slave." And Yahweh said, "He will come down." Then David said, "Will the men of Keilah surrender me and my men into the hand of Saul?" And Yahweh said, "They will surrender you." Then David and his men, about 600, arose and departed from there, and they went wherever they could go. Now it was told to Saul that David had escaped from there, so he ceased going out in pursuit. And David stayed in the wilderness and in the strongholds, and remained in the hill country of the wilderness of Ziph. And Saul sought him every day. But note this, but God did not give him into his hand. Keep that verse in mind when we get to chapter 24. That as Saul was pursuing David, we're told explicitly by the divine writer that God did not allow Saul to catch David. And the lesson here, of course, we could make the point about Joseph and so many others in the Old Testament. And of Joseph it said, and the Lord was with Joseph. Well, why was the Lord with Joseph? Because Joseph was with the Lord. Why was the Lord with David and protecting him? Because David was with the Lord. He was a man after God's own heart. God's ways, God's law, his righteousness, that was of first and foremost importance in David's life. To where even here, when he is bitter and distressed, would have been easier to hide and said, "It's not my fight." He goes, "Lord, Yahweh, what would you have your servant to do?" And before he decides what to do about Saul, he consults God. Which, by the way, Abiathar, by de facto, if memory serves you correctly, he's kind of high priest at this point, or functioning as it, because Saul killed his dad, who was the high priest. And by Saul's disobedience, here's the irony, back in the previous chapter, he has sent the high priest and the divine lot into David's hands. Saul no longer has the ability to consult with God. Now David does. You've given him the high priest and the means by which to ask God. So what does David do? Of course he's going to ask God in this situation. But again, the contrast. David consults the Lord, Saul does not. David is concerned about God's honor and the people. Saul is concerned about himself and his own pride and his own ego. But it's as David is going to and from caves and fortresses and fleeing around in the wildernesses and being a fugitive, that either he pens them during this period of his life or he pens them later reflecting back on this period in his life. But many of the Psalms we read of in the book of Psalms come from this period. Now in your Bibles, they will have the superscription there. It'll say Psalm such and such, and some of them will say a Psalm of David, or a Psalm of such and such when he was here. Now these subscriptions have been in the Hebrew text for a long time, some of them longer than the others. Some of them may be accurate, some have been added later. But they give us an idea when these Psalms were written, and it gives us an idea of what was going through the mind of David when he was going through these trials. If you want to open your book to the book of Psalms, looking at 142 here, we're going to read a few just to get a sense of what's going on internally in David's mind as he's going through these events. In Psalm 142, it's entitled, "A Maskil of David when he was in the cave." That is when he's hiding out in the cave we read about. He writes, "With my voice to Yahweh I cry aloud. With my voice to Yahweh I make supplication. I pour out my complaint before him. I declare my distress before him. When my spirit was faint within me, you knew my path and the way where I walk. They have hidden a trap for me. Look to the right and see that there is no one who regards me. A way of escape has been destroyed from me. No one cares for my soul. I cried to you, O Yahweh. I said, you are my refuge, my portion in the land of the living. Give heed to my cry of lamentation, for I am brought very low. Deliver me from my persecutors, for they are too strong for me. Bring my soul out of prison to give thanks to your name. The righteous will encircle me, for you will deal bountifully with me. Now I want us to note here that by all earthly wisdom, David had no guarantees by the appearance that anything good was going to happen. He's a fugitive in a cave, and the king of his country is seeking his life. And he can't flee anywhere else, but every other king in the surrounding area knows who David is. And they don't want to bring the wrath of Saul upon them either. But note David's assurance here that the righteous will encircle him in verse 7, and that God will deal bountifully with him. He doesn't know how yet, but he knows who God is. He knows who Yahweh is, and he knows what Yahweh has promised him. He knows that God is good to his people. And that is where he stakes his claim. That's where he places his trust. In Psalm 54, for example, another psalm from this period of his life, it's a maskil of David when the Ziphonites came and said to Saul, is not David hiding himself among us? That's in the next section there, chapter 23, where the Ziphonites come out and say, hey, we know where David's at. David knows that it seems like Saul's closing in, that he's being surrounded on all sides, and that's when he writes these words. O God, save me by your name, and render justice to me by your might. O God, hear my prayer. Give ear to the words of my mouth, for strangers have risen against me, and ruthless men have sought my life. They have not set God before them. Behold, God is my helper, the Lord among those who sustains my soul. He will return the evil to my foes, destroy them in your truth. With a freewill offering I will sacrifice to you. I will give thanks to your name, O Yahweh, for it is good. For he has delivered me from all distress, and my eyes have looked in triumph upon my enemies. Again, David hadn't seen that yet. But he was assured of who God is and what was God going to do on his behalf. And we look even in Psalm 57, just a page over or so. This is entitled, for the choir director of David, when he fled from Saul in the cave. Be gracious to me, O God, be gracious to me, for my soul takes refuge in you. And the shadow of your wings I will take refuge until destruction passes by. I will call to God Most High, to God who accomplishes all things for me. He will send from heaven and save me. He reproaches him who tramples upon me. God will send his loving kindness and his truth. My soul is among lions. I am lying down among those who breathe forth fire. Sons of men whose teeth are spears and arrows, and their tongue a sharp sword. Be exalted above the heavens, O God. Let your glory be above all the earth. They have set a net for my steps. My soul is bowed down. They dug a pit before me. They themselves have fallen into the midst of it. My heart is set, O God. My heart is set. I will sing, yes, I will sing praises. Awake my glory, awake harp and lyre. I will awake the dawn. I will give thanks to you, O Lord, among the peoples. I will sing praises to you among the nations, for your loving kindness is great to the heavens, and your truth to the skies. Be exalted above the heavens, O God. Let your glory be above all the earth. There's much we could talk about how do we deal with life's trials and tribulations. But here we see David in these few Psalms we have read. David doesn't diminish the suffering he's going through, and God doesn't expect him to. David is feeling real emotions of pain, of betrayal, of bitterness, if you will, of feeling that the walls are closing in around him. And he lets God know about it. But he doesn't only let God know about his complaint. He turns the complaint into, first, hoping on God's promises of deliverance and good welfare and fruitfulness to his life. And thirdly, he turns this lament into praise, and he reminds himself of God's loving kindness and his goodness and his truth and his faithfulness to his people. And loving kindness is it's a Hebrew term, hesed, which is, loving kindness doesn't really do it full justice. It could also be translated as covenant faithfulness or loyalty or unfailing love. All those words are in that, of God's utter and total devotion and loyalty to those in the covenant if they are loyal to him. It's a loyalty that we can't even begin to grasp fully. And it's that type of faithful love and loyalty that David rests upon when his soul is in agony. And so, there happens to be a chance meeting between Saul and David. David is hiding in the cave in 1 Samuel 24. And, well, Saul feels the call of nature. And he goes off into the cave to relieve himself, is what the text actually says. And if you look in 1 Samuel 24, this is a very chance meeting, it would seem. Looking at verses 1 through 7, now when Saul returned from pursuing the Philistines, he was told, saying, Behold, David is in the wilderness of En-gedi. Then Saul took 3,000 chosen men from all Israel and went to seek David and his men in front of the rocks of the wild goats. And he came to the sheepfolds on the way where there was a cave. And Saul went in to relieve himself. Now David and his men were sitting in the inner recesses of the cave. Then the men of David said to him, Behold, this is the day of which Yahweh said to you, Behold, I am about to give your enemy into your hand, and you shall do to him as seems good in your eyes. Then David arose and cut off the edge of Saul's robe secretly. And it happened afterward that David's heart struck him, because he had cut off the edge of Saul's robe. So he said to his men, Far be it from me, because of Yahweh, that I should do this thing to my Lord, the anointed of Yahweh, to send forth my hand against him, since he is the anointed of Yahweh. And David tore his men to pieces with these words, and did not allow them to rise up against Saul. And Saul arose, left the cave, and went on his way. Now afterward David arose and went out of the cave and called after Saul, saying, My Lord the king. And when Saul looked behind him, David bowed with his face to the ground and prostrated himself before him. Now, going back to chapter 23, the end of verse 14, the end of that verse, it said, though Saul sought David, Yahweh did not deliver David into Saul's hands. And here, what seems to be a chance meeting, I think David's men rightly conclude that Yahweh has delivered Saul into David's hands. This is even their destination. Saul is seeking David someplace else, and it's a pit stop. And it happens to be the cave that David and his men are hiding. And David is able to get so close to Saul, he can cut off a piece of the robe. Interesting enough, this seems to be a homage or allusion back to when Saul actually tore a piece off of Samuel's robe, in which by Samuel said, the Lord has torn the kingdom from you this day. Well, the one whom God tore the kingdom from Saul to give it to is now the one who has cut up a piece of Saul's robe. It's the same symbol being used again. And for the careful reader, we pick up on that. We say, oh, okay, this is our pivotal moment in David's life. But what's interesting is David's response after he does this act. His conscience is pricked. He doesn't feel right about what he did, for no other reason than the fact that Saul is still king, and thereby he is the Lord's anointed. Now, if you'll allow me a brief excursion of taking this principle and making a New Testament application to it, I could cite to you Romans 13, that the governing authorities are established by God, and there would be no authority except by God. Or I could quote to you Jesus and Pilate, where Pilate says, "Do you not know I have the authority to deliver you?" And Jesus says, "You would not have the authority unless it was given to you by heaven." My point is this, and it's a principle for to chew on. If David did not feel justified in this small act against the Lord's anointed, his sovereign, his king, and we have clear teaching in the New Testament about God establishes modern governments, we as Christians should be very careful with how we talk about our government. A quote that I read in an article one time that still pierced in my heart: we should criticize our rulers as much as Jesus criticized his. And I'm not going to explain that. We all can chew on that. But we think about Saul, how unfit he was for office, how unqualified he was to be king. And Yahweh gave Saul into David's hands to do as what seemed fit. And David's conscience, this is a man after God's own heart, is so troubled by the fact that he defiled his garments, if you will. He cut off a part of it. He ruined his garments because he had laid his hand against God's chosen king. See, respect for authority doesn't mean necessarily that the one in authority is qualified for that position. Sometimes God gives bad leaders to teach his people important lessons, hence with Saul. And sometimes God gives righteous leaders to show what true leadership looks like, as we see with David. But something to chew on. Something to chew on. If David was so troubled, why do we as American Christians seem to be so flippant and comfortable with being acidic and caustic with the authorities that God has put in over our place? But we go back to our text here in 1 Samuel. And David cries out, and this scene is, he's showing proper respect for his king. He bows down before him. Not as a sign of subservience, but this was a common symbol of respect for who this man is. Not only is he his king, he's also his father-in-law, as David is married to one of his daughters. But it's interesting the words here of David, and we read here in verses 8 through 15, verse 9 through 15, And David said to Saul, "Why do you listen to the words of men, saying, 'Behold, David seeks to do you evil'?" Now, he's probably referring back to Doeg, the Edomite, who was the one who was willing to kill all of the Lord's people. 10. "Behold, this day with your eyes you have seen that Yahweh has given you today into my hands in the cave. And some said to kill you. But my eye had pity on you, and I said, I will not send forth my hand against my Lord, for he is the anointed of Yahweh. Now my father, see, indeed, see the edge of your robe in my hand, for that I cut off the edge of your robe and did not kill you. Know and see that there is no evil or transgression in my hand, and I have not sinned against you, though you are lying in wait for my life to take it. May Yahweh judge between you and me, and may Yahweh avenge me upon you, but my hand shall not be against you. As the proverb of the ancient says, out of the wicked comes forth wickedness, but my hand shall not be against you. After whom has the king of Israel come out? Whom are you pursuing? After a dead dog? After a single flea? Therefore, Yahweh be judge and execute justice between you and me, and may he see and plead my cause and execute justice for me to escape from your hand. The key verses of this section is verses 12 and 15, where David is invoking the name of God, may God judge between you and me. And what David is saying here, whether you do me harm or do me good, doesn't matter how you treat me, I am calling God as witness to avenge me if you do me wrong. I will not lift a hand against you, but I'm not the one you have to worry about. You have to worry about God acting against you. And I can't help but marvel at the courage, humility, and bravery, all these other adjectives we could say, of David here. David could take out his enemy and it'd be done with. Saul also. David could have taken him out a long time ago and ended this. David could have given in to pride and started berating Saul for all the hurt and the trouble he has put him through. But what does David do? He invokes God's will on whatever is about ready to happen. May God judge between us. And I can't help but think maybe there's a lesson here for how we deal with conflict, how we deal with disagreements. So many times I think we get too much of ourselves in this when perhaps we should, before any discussion of disagreement, maybe we should invoke saying, may God judge between us. May God's will be done in this. Perhaps that might cause different outcomes. And so often what degrades into yelling matches. Case in point on this, just by way of application and illustration. President Cope of FC in the 60s was getting ready to expel a student due to behavioral issues. And his father, assuming this was in the 70s, and his father was having none of it, of the student. And so we bought a ticket in the 70s, airline ticket, to fly down to Tampa to be there the next day, marched right into the president's office and started berating the president of this college for how dare you expel my son, and he's foaming at the mouth. And Mr. Cope, all he said was, Brother so-and-so, would you lead us in a prayer before we continue any further in our discussion? For wisdom about the decision we have to make here today. The brother did. And it sucked all the rage and bitterness out of him. It's one of those few things in life it's kind of hard to do, to stay angry and bitter and prideful when you have to come before your God in prayer on behalf of you and another person. And it was relayed to me that Cope said that they had a pleasant discussion the rest of that, and they came to an agreement, and they saw the wisdom and the decision that was made. And I think we're going to see this here, that by David bringing God into the conversation, I think we see one of the last few moments of clarity from Saul. Pick up at verse 16. Now it happened when David had finished speaking these words to Saul, Saul said, "Is this your voice, my son David?" Then Saul lifted up his voice and wept. And he said to David, "You are more righteous than I, for you have dealt well with me, while I have dealt evil with you. And you have declared today that you have done good to me, that Yahweh surrendered me into your hand, and yet you did not kill me. For if a man finds his enemy, will he let him get away safely? May Yahweh therefore reward you with good in return for what you have done this day. Now, behold, I know that you will surely be king, and the kingdom of Israel will be established in your hand. So now swear to me by Yahweh that you will not cut off my seed after me, and that you will not destroy my name from my father's household." Even a wicked person, every once in a while, has a moment of clarity where they understand God's truth. In fact, I forgot the atheist's name, but he was a famous atheist of the last century, and on his deathbed it was reported to say that he was terrified that he might be wrong in his life's actions, that there actually might be a God. I would say that's a moment of clarity brought by God's truth, perhaps too late, but I digress. Here, the evidence was so overwhelming to Saul that he has this last moment of clarity. He recognizes that it was God who gave him into David's hand that day, that Saul should have died by all rights. And David didn't kill him. David had a chance to kill him again, chasing after him out of the cave, and he didn't kill him. David had the chance again to engage in one-on-one combat and kill him, and he didn't do it. Several times that incident, that day, Saul's life was spared. And it's at this point that Saul confesses that not him, not Jonathan, not any other son, but David will be king over God's people. That David is the rightful ruler and the man after God's own heart. And at the end here, as we see, Saul is a king like the other nations, and so he does something that, well, to prevent what would happen in the other nations. Oftentimes when dynasties changed, in order to ensure that there would be no wars of succession, the new ruling family would track down every last living descendant of the previous ruling family and make sure, well, they're no longer breathing. This is why if you study English history, for example, every couple centuries or so there's a war of succession because they didn't kill somebody on the last line and they pop up 20 years later and says, no, I'm the rightful king or queen. And that's why you get all these different family trees. And so what Saul is asking here is, because this was common practice, that David would swear an oath before his God that he would not kill Saul or his line. Now, David didn't. David kept his oath. But later, Saul will receive the judgment that his line will end, but it won't be by the hands of Saul. And David will fulfill this, because there is one child that does escape that slaughter, and years later, when David is king, does show mercy and takes care of that child. And David fulfills that oath, and we'll get there when we get to 2 Kings or 2 Samuel. But we see in verse 22, so David swore to Saul, and Saul went to his home, but David and his men went up to the fortress. While this incident ended well, David still doesn't trust Saul, and I think we've seen with good reason. Saul goes back to his home, and David still maintains his fugitive status by living in caves and fortresses in the wilderness, waiting until the day it is safe to finally come back home. In the narrative of 1 Samuel, Lord willing, next week we will see there's a little epitaph that comes in of 1 Samuel 25 about Abigail and Nabal and David's exchange with them. But as we're going to get further and further in 1 Samuel, we are going to see the changing of a guard. Samuel's days are numbered. He will soon join his maker. Saul's reign as king will come to a tragic end. And eventually David will be finally crowned king over God's people. And as we study through the life of David, we have to keep reminding ourselves that David is a type. He prefigures Christ centuries before Christ even showed up, in that he is a man after God's own heart who desired to do nothing but the will of God. And he showed himself of what a good, righteous king looks like. Now, David had his faults, and that's where the similarities end, because Jesus was sinless. But in this, we keep seeing why in Matthew's gospel and Luke's gospel, in the genealogy, we get to Jesus the Christ, the son of David, the son of Adam. David is one of these pivotal figures in this genealogy because he typifies what it means to be a man after God's own heart. And even through trial and tribulation, we find that David still desired to do God's will when most of us, we would say he had an excuse not to. But to be a man after God's own heart is one who does God's will no matter the circumstances, no matter how tough life gets, because it's the only right way to live. I look out here tonight and I see that most of us of age have obeyed the gospel call, but perhaps there's someone here tonight who hasn't. Perhaps there is somebody who has not yet named the name of Christ and accept him in the waters of baptism for remission of their sins. Well, there's water ready. We can assist you with that in just a moment. But maybe tonight there's someone here who, like this morning, needs prayers. Maybe there's a need on your heart. There's a sin in your life. There's a temptation you're wrestling with, or you need encouragement. If we can help you in any way, why don't you come forward? Let's see how we stand and sing the song that's been selected.